going on, guys? Welcome to Twisted Back. Today I'm going to be showing you how to rebuild your 4CS forks on your KTM or maybe Husqvarna, whichever one you guys have. So it's going to be pretty simple today. We're just going to do like a little walkthrough. First I'm going to show you everything that you're going to need, and then we're going to actually go through this step by step, pull the suspension out and break this thing down and show you guys how it's done. So this is actually my first time doing the 4CS. It's pretty simple. I've always messed with Cowies, so their separate functions show us a little bit different, but a little bit more difficult than this. So these are pretty easy. I've already got the left one completed. It's ready to go back on the bike, and we're gonna rebuild the right one today. So let's jump right into this, and I'll start and go over everything you guys need. All right, so let's run through this real quick. Couple things you guys are for sure gonna need for this rebuild. A lot of people like to use these. These are the seal drivers, very handy. You can get these, pick them up pretty cheap. Let me show you another thing. This is actually what I was using before. It's just a piece of PVC pipe, and you can cut that to fit over your shock. And you'll see exactly how to use that here in a little bit. So you're gonna need that. You're gonna need a 19mm wrench, a couple flathead screwdrivers, preferably some pretty small ones. The seal bullet. You're gonna need the fork cap tool for the 4CS fork cap. You're gonna need this is a 10mm T-handle or a socket to pull the forks out. You're gonna need a 17mm Allen. You're gonna need probably an adjustable wrench, a torque wrench, and you're also gonna need your a way to measure the oil, and obviously you're gonna need your fork oil. And also, I like to keep my phone out and I pull the video up on Rocky Mountain, and I just watch that as I go through and make sure I'm doing everything correct. So let's go ahead and break this down, and we'll get the fork pulled out, and let's get started. All right, so I'm gonna pull this fork out real quick. You're gonna take your 10mm T-handle or your socket, break these bolts loose on the triple clamps. And I've already pulled the axle and the wheel off, so that's not necessary, but you guys will have to do that to remove your forks. I always like to keep one hand on the fork, just in case it does decide to slide on out. The other one was actually kind of difficult to pull out, so I'm assuming this one's going to be the same situation. There it is. Alright, so I've got my fork cleaned off. I've got a lot of the excess dirt around the bottom off of the fork. This is where you take your fork cap tool, specifically for the 4CS forks. It slides right down in the cap like that. And you take your adjustable wrench and just break this cap loose. Very important that your clickers are back all the way off to the soft setting. And it's very important that you use some sort of rag or soft jaws to clamp on these. And I try to clamp where the triple clamps are going to be clamping. So let's go ahead and break this thing loose. There we go. You'll see a little bit of the pressure there get relieved. Just spin that all the way out. So I can pull the cap out just a little bit. I know it's loose. Take the cap off, and this is where you're going to need some sort of drain pan. Basically, you're just going to pull this out, pull it out of the vise, pull this up, and drain all the oil out of this upper cartridge. Got this cap loose. Pull that out. Drain what oil is in the top out very carefully. So there's not much oil in there. That's not a good thing. That's probably why these forks are very, very harsh at the moment. You can work this in and out to try to get some of the excess oil out. Okay. So after you get all the oil drained out of your top cartridge, you will securely put the cap back on, not tight, just snug it down. And then you're gonna flip your forks upside down and in the vise and clamp on the bottom. This is where you're gonna need your 17 millimeter Allen. It goes in the bottom here and it's gonna break that loose. I need a, here we go, wrench for that. So we're gonna break this loose and we're gonna drain the oil out of the bottom of the fork. Apologize for that, it's a little tight. Okay, so we got the cap removed. Now we're gonna take this out and drain the oil out of this bottom section. So now that I have the oil drained out of the bottom and the top of this fork, I can now disassemble it, take it apart. So you're gonna take your cap loose again. It can be a little messy. And you'll just pull this out. And then you just wanna pull you may have to wiggle it just a little bit to get that out of there. Okay, so there's the internals. That was a little tougher than what the other one was. So now you can finish straining this and get all the oil out of that thing. So the next step in this process, I'm gonna pull this over. I've kind of wiped this down already just a little bit. You're gonna take your 19 millimeter wrench and you're gonna put it on, pull this over here. You're gonna put it on this little piece in here. Slides inside there, and then you're going to take your cap wrench. Let me just set that there. Put your cap wrench on, and you're going to break this loose. There we go. And then you just spin the cap off. This thing may get loose and then tight again. I've got the cap off there. Set that down, and you want to watch for these spacers. I'm not sure why they're on this fork. They're both on the top side. So there's your spacers that come out. Pretty sure those go on the bottom. So you pull your spring out, and this is your dampening rod here. So that'll pretty much do that. And now we can set this stuff aside and clean it and get everything ready to reassemble on this piece. Next, we're going to take the outer cartridge and pull that apart. Okay, so now you're going to take your cartridge and the outer tube, and you're gonna put it in your vise, clamp it on the bottom. I like to do mine sort of at an angle, and just take your little, I like to use as small of a screwdriver as I can find, and just get in there and work this dust seal out. Okay, so there I got the dust seal pulled down. That thing is pretty chewed up. So now you want to have a very good light so you can see this part, but there's actually a ring in here. There's my retaining ring. That basically just holds your, that holds the oil seal in there so it doesn't just flop out. So now I'm ready to pull this thing apart. So you just want to give it a nice little jerk, and that should come off. So that is the complete outer tube is removed. So this part here, you kind of want to be careful. You want to keep everything together when you take it off. Make sure you guys can see that. Let's pull this over here. I want you guys to be able to see. So here's the ring. That's the retaining ring. And then this is the actual oil seal. There's your oil seal, and here's another little spacer. This is the, it's got the inner bushing in this one, and this is the outer bushing. So I usually just slide these off. Once you take off the inner bushing, the outer bushing here has like a little opening in it there. And you just take your screwdriver. Okay, so maybe this is this view isn't the best, so I wanted to get a up close view of that, but so there's that bushing, and then you take off your inner bushing, and then the seal along with the spacer. Now this part's kind of important. If you've never done fork seals before, you want to take this seal off and always lay it. If it comes off this way, always lay it upright. But I'll show you guys, that way I know which way the other one's going to go back on. But I'll also show you another little trick I like to do to get them on the correct way. And then just pull your retaining ring and the dust seal, pull that stuff off and lay it out. So you can see here I've got everything laid out on the table. So at this point, you just want to go through and clean everything really well. Wipe it all down, get all the dirt off. This is a good time to clean this while it's still in the vise. A lot of people use brake parts cleaner. You can actually buy a suspension cleaner that you can use during this process. I don't have any, so I'll just be using my spray bottle. It has some purple powder in it. It works pretty good. So I'm going to get everything wiped down, and then we're going to start the reassembly process. Once you got everything clean, you're ready to start your reassembly process here. So this is whenever the little seal bullet comes in handy. It goes on the top. There's a little, let me pull this back off. There's a little cavity there. It'll actually rip your seals if you're not careful. So you put this on there and it protects it from that. So I like to use the SKF brand, really good brand. They make a really good product. So I'm gonna get these out and then we're gonna start the assembly process. So here's the SKF seals, and one thing I want to touch on about the seals, and a lot of people get confused on which direction these things go on. This is the other little trick I want to show you. So you see like the real open cavity here on this seal, and the other side doesn't have that. It's just an edge. That open cavity actually goes upwards towards the oil. So when it goes on this fork leg, it's going to go upwards towards the outer cartridge area to hold the oil. That's the best way to look at it. It's an easy way to remember how to put these back on. Alright, so I've got the fork here in the vise, so we're going to start putting the seals back on. So first thing comes is the dust seal. And I like to take a little bit of grease. Forgot to mention that in the beginning of the video that you might need some grease. Take the grease and just wipe it around like so. And then we slide that thing on first. Pull it all the way to the bottom. And then the retaining clip goes on. And then you're going to put the oil seal on. Put some grease in that as well. Just a little bit. And remember, the open cavity side goes upwards. So we're going to slide that on. Next is the spacer. And then you're going to do the let me clean this thing off real quick. Do the outer bushing. And then you can actually pull that thing, the seal bullet, off. And then you're going to do the inner bushing. You have to spread that open just a little bit with your fingers. and pop that thing into place. So now you've got everything down here in the bottom. And then next, at this point, you can go ahead and grab your outer tube and just slide that down over the top. Oops, hit the garage door. Slide that down and just push these things up into that. And this is where you'll put your seal driver on. These things are pretty easy to use. You just put them together, hold them with your hand, and give it a couple good sharp hits. And you can feel that seal when it bottoms out. You can definitely tell. You just want to get enough clearance in there for this snap ring to hold that seal in. Okay, I think I've got it. I feel it bottoming out, so we're gonna try that. Pull this off. And then you wanna push your retaining clip up into the tube. Take your small screwdriver. You can kind of push this thing together with your fingers here to get it started. And then I like to just use a screwdriver and work it on up in there. It can be tricky. And you will hear that pop into place. There it went. So that's good. I like to go back around with the screwdriver one more time. Make sure that's popped in. And then you can push your dust seal up into the fork with your fingers. And then you can actually drop this tube completely down. And you can push that seal up in there like so with the outer tube. So there we go. Now we're ready to add oil. So before we can add oil to this fork, we got to get this cartridge back in it. And before we put the cartridge back in, you want to remove this push rod in the bottom here. Just pull that out, lay it aside. And then we're going to put the cartridge back in. So this is where they actually make a tool that you can push this down in there. I just give it a few taps with my hand and it works very well. So there we go. Now that's in, we can flip it over and add oil. Okay, so now I have the cartridge back into the fork. As you can see here, the dampening rod is sticking out, and we'll be pumping this here in a second. But one more important thing you want to notice here is that the inner cartridge, the threads are actually at the end of this tube. I made the mistake of one time of putting this back in and it wasn't all the way in, and I added oil and then I had to go back and drain the oil out and put this back in the correct way and make sure it's all the way here. And the reason you want to make sure that's all the way at the end is this cap goes in once we put the oil in, and that's got a thread on it. So now on this fork in particular, I think the owner's manual calls for 640 milliliters total, and we're going to be putting 510 in this lower unit. Okay, so I've got my oil measured out. It was 510 for the lower unit here. So we're going to go ahead and add this oil slowly. And one of the key points here is this thing is going to actually fill up. And once this starts to fill up, you have to come down here to the bottom to this dampening rod and you have to pump that. You can hear it getting all the air out. So you want to keep pumping that as you're adding this oil into the lower unit. Okay, so I have all the oil poured in to this lower unit here, and I'm still pumping this dampening rod. I just want to show you guys kind of how this works. You can see a little bit of that oil coming out. You want to wiggle this thing around, get all that pumped in there. Any of the excess is going to come out, so don't have to worry about that. Okay, so now I've got all the oil in this lower part and I've got it pumped, and I feel pretty good about that. So I'm going to clean this top piece off, and then you want to put in the base valve assembly, which is this lower unit cap. Slide that in there, and I'm going to torque that to 29 foot-pounds when I get that in there. This way you'll be using your 17mm Allen cap. So right there is 29 foot-pounds. So that's that. So now I've got the fork turned over and the vise here. I've got the cap is still off. I haven't put anything back in. And you want to put the remainder amount of this oil into the top. It's 130 milliliters for this particular fork. I've got that measured out here. So we're just gonna pull the dampening rod up a little bit and pour that in. Okay, so this part can be sort of tricky. This is when you want to bleed the cartridge. After you've added the oil in this top part, you're gonna hold it out here and you're gonna pump this rod until it rebounds on its own. And I will show you that here in just a second. I'm gonna pump it until it's rebounding, and then I'll show you guys what it's supposed to look like. Okay, so as you're pumping this rod, it's very important to kind of hold it off to the side a little bit when you pump. And you can actually hear the air bubbles coming out of the oil down in there. It may take a second. The first time I did this, I felt like an idiot because I pumped and pumped and pumped forever and this thing wasn't building up any pressure. But once you start getting close, you can actually feel the resistance, and when you let go, it'll actually rebound on its own. But this one is not pumped all the way yet. It should rebound almost all the way to the top. See, I'm getting a lot of rebound resistance there at the top now. So I'm just gonna pump that a few more times. We're actually getting really close right there. So I'm gonna call that good. It's rebounding pretty well, almost all the way to the top. Okay, so now that we got this thing pumped up, we're ready to start installing everything, put it back in. I'm gonna start with my spacers here, put those back in, and then don't forget about your push rod. That'll go on the top. And I can install the spring. So this part can actually get a little tricky. So now we can put the cap back on. But you gotta push this thing down to get the thread started. It's always easier if you can kind of sit down beside this thing, and I like to put it between my knees here, pull the spring down and start this. Hopefully you guys can see that. Okay, so there we go, it's snugged up. Let me check the torque specs before we do this. Okay, so the torque specs on this is 14 foot-pounds, so honestly not a lot at all. And unfortunately, the way I've got this set up, I don't have the I don't have a way to grab that cap. So just snug that up, and that should be 14 foot-pounds. That's not much at all. So just put a little snug on it and it should be good to go. And then once you get the cap, oh, another thing you want to make sure too is right here on this, the locking nut, you want to make sure that's backed all the way down against the dampening rod when you tighten this cap down, or else you won't be tightening all the way. So now I can pull this up and I can thread the cap back on. Alright guys, so this is the last step here. I got the cap snugged on with my hand and I put it back in the vise here, the fork, and I'm ready to tighten this thing up. And you just want to do like just a little snug. You don't want to over tighten that. It's going to be in the triple clamp, so it's not going to come loose. And that is the last step on putting your forks back together. Now you're ready to slide this thing back in your triple clamps and go rip. And I hope this video has helped some people out. And as always guys, keep it twisted back. Hit that subscribe button down there. Give me a like, comment. Let me know what you guys think about the video. And just keep up with some future videos we got coming. I'm really excited. And I want to thank the guys over at Central Kentucky Motorsports in Lexington. Awesome group of guys keeping me going this year. So I got some cool things coming with them. And I also want to thank Chris Maynard at Maynard Racing Performance. He's got my rear shock at the moment. As you can tell, I've got this thing ripped off. He's rebuilding the rear shock for me, so I'm super pumped to get that thing back. And he's a super good dude, and he definitely knows what's going on with the suspension. So once again, thank you guys for watching, and hit that subscribe button.